My name is Sander. I'm an anthropologist based at Leiden University in the Netherlands, and I also co-run Pushing Borders. And so, like Indy was saying, I'll be moderating today's session, and I'm beyond stoked to introduce Brian Glenney. I was looking forward to the session for many weeks. Brian is an associate professor at Norwich University in the US. He's a graffiti artist, a philosopher, and of course also a skater. And his work on skateboarding is, I think, one of my favorite. So with Steve Merle, he wrote this beautiful piece on the ecology of urban space in relation to skateboarding. But he's also written about spontaneity in skateboarding and skate culture. With Paul, who's also joining us, he wrote about hybrid spaces and skate culture. And then earlier this year, along with some of the SHRED folks, you published a work on skateboarding in the anthropocene. For me, Brian is really a possibility model. I mean, the image already shows a possibility model for how to be a researcher and a skater and an artist at the same time. And I think he's a force of energy that we should be happy to have among us in skate scholarship. And I would like to kind of mention maybe two things before handing over to Brian, to kind of ideas in your work that really stand out to me, and that are in the back of my mind every day, every night when I'm asleep, when I'm teaching. The first one is that skateboarding, according to you, is a thing in and of itself. It's something that you cannot compare to anything else. Maybe to a bone, as we can see, but other than that, it's intangible, it's nebulous, it has a unique ecological context, and we should be very precious of this thing we call a skateboard. And I feel as though more recently, temporality plays an important role in Brian's work. So a piece that I've read a couple of weeks ago that is, I think, now in print or still on the review, you write how skateboarding, what it is today and what is skatable today, might not be skatable tomorrow. And I think that's a fascinating thing to keep in the back of our minds when we engage skateboarding. And today, Brian will be talking about skateboarding's origins, its different trajectories, its futures, and it's going to be a more speculative piece. And I hope that you also touch upon the possibility of a world without skateboarding, or with a different kind of skateboarding, or what kind of directions we'll be taking in the future. um, but yeah, I'm really excited. Just a comment about the setup. Brian will talk about his work for about 30 minutes, or just under 30 minutes. I'll then open the discussion with a couple of questions, and then we'll have time for all attendees to chime in. You can write your question in the chat, or just unmute yourself. And as Indy mentioned, the session is recorded and will be posted on the SHRED website, so keep that in mind. And it's a truly international event. So for me, it's all good. It's noon, I'm happy, it's light outside. But Indy just mentioned it's 8 p.m. where you're at, in Brisbane in Australia. And I think this is the very impressive thing of today's talk, beyond the quality of the presentation. Brian is now in a time zone where it's 3 a.m. in the morning, which I believe is the perfect time for a speculative piece on skateboarding. So without further ado, over to you, Brian. Welcome.
All right. Thank you very much, Sander. Yeah, Sander, you, in your last piece, you have this phrase, skateboarding is a mystery. And that's how I start my piece with Steve Mull. And it's how I think about skateboarding. But I guess what I want to figure out is why it's a mystery. I mean, it should be easy to know what skateboarding is. We know what baseball is. We know what football is. I see my beautiful animation has stopped. I guess it only runs for 20 times, but the general idea with this animation, let me see if I can get it to run one more time here. Oh, look at that. I guess it won't run another. Man, that's so funny. is that I want to connect skateboarding with what it is to be human, but in a way that's different than other things, right? So take, for instance, our ape man, I guess, in 2001, throwing a bone. The funny thing is it turns into a skateboard, but the throwing of the bone in this particular instance requires a sideways orientation. And I mean, we kind of discover like spears and other kind of projectiles being used for hunting. And we now know that the accuracy and force with which you throw a projectile is made significantly more efficient if the individual is sideways. Sideways orientation to me is kind of a key that unlocks the fates and futures of skateboarding, as I'm going to try to argue, largely because humans are the only ones that have discovered this sideways orientation. That is, that's what I thought. And then, you know, I think this cat has discovered it. What's unique, though, about the sideways orientation is there's something fierce about it. There's something hunting about it, warrior about it, even this cute little kitten, right? So I'm going to get back to that in a second here, but here's kind of the outline of what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to start just by giving a little structure to what this project is going to look like, and then just give you a little dump of the ideas that I have. The ideas that I have, I'm not going to give you all of it, right? I'm just going to give you the most salient aspects that I think will have some grip. And then I'll just end with this idea that skateboarding, the skateboard itself could be a machinic assemblage, a bit like the plow, a bit like the stirrup, in which humanity can kind of turn or pivot on this device. So real quick, this is what I'm going to give you, like what I think skateboarding scholarship is right now, what it could be, like kind of what it should be. And then sadly, I'm going to do something different than both. So we just look at, you know, every single day I get kind of a link to a new skate paper through some kind of Google subscription that Paul O'Connor suggested I do. If you do it, you'll see like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people writing about skateboarding. And there's basically like these three categories, philosophical categories, that I kind of structure the papers into, right? They're either talking about like the nature of skateboarding, you know, is it a sport? Is it a leisure activity? Blah, blah, blah. Nadowski, I think that's how you pronounce the name, just wrote this great paper about how it's this aesthetic of the street. I love that paper right now. You've also got these like, what do skaters know? How do they teach what they know to other people? Put this in the epistemology file. Sander, your recent paper on the skater's gaze, that's sitting right there. And then, you know, how should skaters behave? Why should they behave this way? That's kind of this skate ethics, right? So, you know, whatever project you're working on in skateboarding right now, maybe you could fit it into one of these categories. If you can't, that's brilliant. You've broken my machine right away. That's okay. In addition, like as I go along, I think this is going to be being recorded. And also I would love any comments you have, even as we go along. So if you're like, Glenney, I've got a fourth category for you, type it in right now. That would be so funny. You can even have this discussion going on behind my back because I can't actually see the comments. Feel free. So this is what I think skateboarding maybe should be. I'm borrowing this word from Paul, who's kind of applied. I mean, you know, he didn't make up the word prefigurative, but he kind of used it in the context of skateboarding. So we could take all those three categories and we could say, you know, what could skateboarding become? So when we write, you know, about whether or not skateboarding is a sport or something like that, we should actually, or could actually be asking, could it be a sport? Could it be something that we want it to be? Could we want it to be a street aesthetic? I think this prefigurative skateboarding scholarship is actually what we should be doing as scholars. Should, or could skateboarders be having a particular skater's gaze, right? Paul and I and our friend Max have been working on audition and skateboarding, skate sound. And I think this is a way of saying like, hey, could skateboarders organize their world around their skate sound? Right? That's I think really interesting approach to this, that I think has that's quite akin to how we skate, right? We're always doing prefigurative skating. We're skating towards the future. We're skating as if we are the future, in my opinion, right? This goes too for how skaters should behave, right? When we write a paper, it's not, like, should they? It's like, could they? Could skaters be more inclusive? Could they be fully decentralized, right? Could we have, could we lower the influence of Thrasher covers and increase the, I don't know, some other photographic journalism? So I think there's an interesting way to go, but this takes an understanding of what skateboarding is. And as Sander and I believe, skateboarding is just too much of a mystery. It seems like we have to know where we came from, what we're about, before we can start announcing like what we could become. And so I'm going to call this descriptive skateboarding. I do this in my philosophical work, like descriptive metaphysics, it's called, where you kind of just ask, like, what are the conditions such that this thing is the way that it is? Okay, so, right, so what are the conditions in the world, materially, socially, etc., just that skateboarding is the way that it is today, right? I think that's the kind of move I'm going to make. And if I just put it most simply, right, it's about humans rolling sideways with others, pillaging streets for spots, right? That's, I think, in many ways, like the most simplistic overlay I can put on skateboarding. You might think it's too much, this pillaging concept, right? We've got skate parks now. We don't need to thieve spots from other people, other places, but hey, that's for debate. This also helps get us into this question of why is it that skaters are inclusive and exclusive in just the way they are? It's such a weird thing in the sense that skateboarding is the most accessible, right? It's very cheap. A lot of weirdos do it, like myself. People that just don't fit in mainstream sport. And yet it's not nearly as inclusive as we would expect, as diverse as we would expect. I'm kind of borrowing this by way from a paper I just reviewed that starts with that kind of brilliant kind of overlay on a problem in skateboarding, right? At least in skateboarding ethics. Okay, so anyway, this is what I'm going to be doing today. And I'm going to just kind of do it in this, breakdown of these three categories, but I'm going to do it opposite from my title, because I think there's something historically powerful about starting with this notion of sidewaysness, both in context of humanity and then skateboarding itself. So I think a lot of historians have just kind of like pushed back the date of when skateboarding was invented to the 1920s. By the way, total opportunity for someone to comment right now and say, this guy is smoking something, or it's like, he needs more coffee. But I think if you read papers on roller skating and how diverse it was, it seemed to kind of, not be gender specific. It wasn't race specific. It was something that a lot of young people did. And the skates were quite, as you can see, minimalistic. They could just fit over your shoes quite often. So you can just imagine you know, you got these two skates in your closet in your 1920s. One of them goes missing. Your friends are out skating. What do? You grab one of them. And the only way to skate it is sideways, right? I'm just literally being speculative about what happened here in the 1920s, but by the 1930s, you have kind of a first model of a skateboard that's just sold as is. I don't know why it has only 3 wheels. It has only 1 wheel in the back. This is the worst idea. Like, you can imagine, every skater is like, oh my gosh, you're gonna die. Don't skate that. But I think it was an attempt at allowing for turning, quite readily turning with this device, because, you know, maybe they didn't have trucks that were loose, or even trucks at all. But then by the 1940s, right, you have these DIY effort to just remove the skates off of the roller skates, throw them onto a piece of wood, and by the 1950s, right, boom, you have manufactured skateboards, to the point where in 1960, you know, we have what looks to be a kind of skateboard culture of freaking marauding in the streets and pissing people off. I know that The Devil's Toy, filmed in Montreal, is kind of a mockumentary of sorts, maybe a quite early one. But it suggests that there was something like this culture. Let's see if I can get this. Wow, I can't seem to manage to start this other one. There we go. But of course, people didn't know what to do with a skateboard, right? They're forward facing. Some people, I mean, this is mad, right? You know, now we know how that one dime skater learned how to skate face forward, right? He just stayed in Montreal. I just skated with him. What? I can't remember his name. Someone write it in the comments. All right. Devil's Toy, 1960s. I think it's so amazing that skateboarding came to be that way. And it still is that way, right? Let me move on to my next slide. Oh, now my computer's mad at me. So as I wait for my computer to not be mad at me, it seems like this sidewayness is something, again, as I was saying at the beginning, something quite primitive. We find the use of tools in pre-human species, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, may have used spears as well. Oh man, my computer really did freeze. Wow. At least we have this beautiful visage to gaze at here. The next slide is like basically, you know, the dawn of mankind slide, where he kind of like uses his sideways ability to throw spears more accurately and forcefully, as I was talking about earlier. Oh, let's see here. You know how this goes, people. When your ideas are this hot, this is what happens. All right, let's regroup. Don't make fun of my desktop here. Now, where is my little presentation? It's coming back, people. And what you will see is something quite brilliant. It's all of the sports that use this sideways orientation. Think about them in your mind as we wait for my PowerPoint to reassemble itself. Call them out in your head. We got baseball. We've got cricket. I'm not going to say the G word, but that's one of them as well. The G word being, come on, baby. There's our little slide, right? Sideways stance. Look at all the sports, from sideways survival to stance play, right? Even golf is a sideways activity. Fighting is a sideways activity, right? So when you throw a ball, when you throw a football, it's sideways. There seems to be, within kind of the human mindset, still a competitive or a warrior edge, if you will, whenever your orientation is sideways. When I film skateboarding with my long lens, my HVX, I don't stand face forward to the action. I have a sideways regular stance. And it seems to change the way that I film, my filming style. So I just suggesting that there's something powerful about this sideways idea. There's something phenomenologically relevant about it. What's more is that it seems like skateboarders, surfers, and snowboarders are the only ones that can be called stanced, in that they either have a regular goofy stance. All the other...
Sorry, can I interrupt you? Are you still trying to reload your PowerPoint?
No, I'm good to go.
Oh, okay. I can't see your screen, so can you try and share it again?
Oh, for sure.
It's not showing for me
Thank
anyway.
you for jumping in.
Yeah.
Oh, now I get to look at more comments, please. Now, so share the screen.
I'll let you know when we can see it.
I forgot how to do the share screen thing.
So there should be a little share screen with a green arrow pointing up.
Boom. Did it.
Okay. So we didn't. I think you might need just to go back one if you wanted to just recap.
Yeah. You see the primordial bits. Okay, there we are. All the sports. Do you see them? Okay, perfect. Again, you saw these in your mind. You don't need these icons.
We've got them
there
now.
They are.
Thank you.
There they are. Thank you so much, Indy. None of these sports have a stance like regular or goofy. Could be that they're more impacted by handedness, which hand is the stronger one, right? Or footedness. But needless to say, there's something unique about these three. And we don't even know when this sideways stance, which is either regular or goofy, was actually discovered. You'd think it'd be surfing, quite obvious, but the really early accounts of surfing don't have surfers going sideways. They're face forward, or they're sitting, or they're on their knees. It's not till like about, I think, 1874 where we get this nice drawing off of a photo of sideways surfing. Right at that time, it's kind of like this kingly pursuit. So maybe there's a correlation there between kingliness, and sideways riding of the wave. Right here, we also have two different kinds of boards being used. This very narrow board, I think it's called an Olo, is so narrow, it's almost as if you have to be sideways to ride on it. And then this other board, I think it's an Allay. You don't have to be sideways. So again, I think there's something very recent about the discovery of having not, a sideways stance. And if you think about it, it's such a weird access point for human bodies, right? You're anyone who skates knows this. You're just in continual balance. I've got these, squeaky trucks, and wherever I skate, I'm squeaking around because I'm constantly adjusting my stance, updating, the kind of posture that I have in order to stay stable. So my gosh, I just think that there's something that we've been missing that seems so relevant and powerful about what we do. And I think skateboarding has it on lock, if you will. And so I've kind of, don't laugh, but maybe you should laugh. I've kind of added this little spear to this sideways surfing man as if to suggest that when you turn sideways, these old primordial senses of hunting just come alive, right? I'm being very speculative, but think about it. When you start rolling down the street sideways, what happens to you? Huh? I'm just saying, man. Hunting, finding that spot. All right. Let's get to something less speculative. What are the spaces of skateboarding, right? So quite early, we find, right, I guess in the 60s, right, we had the skateboarders just rolling in the streets, competing with cars. In The Devil's Toy, you find the police stopping the skateboarders and stealing their skateboards. I mean, how... this just happened to me this weekend. So it's like it's still happening. All right. But needless to say, the idea that you have these kind of open spaces that are the skater's choice, made available through cement architecture, urban architecture. Here's some old Burnside photos. I skated this horrible place in Portland, and I didn't go back. I mean, I'm like, this place is the worst place to skate in the world. I can't believe that red actually made this into something that was fun. By the way, if you've ever been there, it is fun for like the first 5 minutes until you just immediately injure yourself, because Burnside is just, I don't know, it's not made for normal humans. All right. But nowadays, right, we really have taken advantage, not so much of the open spaces, but the polluted spaces. Got 2 papers coming out on this idea that Paul gave me. Thanks, Paul. Where it really does seem like a majority of new skateboard parks today are being built on brownfields. In America, we have a lot of Superfund sites. Most of the DIY spots that you guys are partaking in, they are on some kind of brownfield, most likely. I built one in Massachusetts, turned out to be an old arms manufacturer location that was torn down. So it had this beautiful kind of like cement garage floor that was just there. And we started building on it. And everyone's like, dude, that's, you know, you're working with some kind of like nasty chemicals. And they tore down our DIY. And we were like, oh my gosh. So anyway, it just seems so common for skateboarders to be engaged in pollution these days, to the point where we've become very good at it. So this is my friend Old Head Chris, and he has this winter, I guess last winter, he took his barbecue and added 4 feet to the pole that holds it, and then he shoved it in the ground to puncture this membrane that's around 2 feet below the surface. That membrane is a remediation layer that essentially prevents this pollution, these toxins from off-gassing. And his idea was like, hey, if I just puncture this membrane, they're not going to remove the barbecue. Sure enough, it's still there. And there's this open question, like, was what Old Head Chris did safe? I mean, is this actually a healthy thing to do? No, or maybe, yeah, I don't know. The idea here is he's kind of taken this polluted space and just naturally made something more to it, right? It's not something he says he even thought about. He said it was just like the second he saw the barbecue, he's like, dude, this is perfect. I'm just going to puncture that membrane. They'll never remove it. And this kind of suggests that Chris has what's called enskilment with 1 L, kind of like how a sailor gets their sea legs with some kind of knack, some kind of like natural ability, seemingly. Seems like skaters just kind of have this knack for polluted spaces, just like how the sailor has for the open sea. I pursue this a lot in a couple papers, but I don't want to talk about it too much anymore. I'm so sick of thinking about it. Needless to say, I think there's some kind of polluted leisure and enskilment that skateboarders have from just working in these polluted spots. Polluted spots that are only available now, right? Largely through kind of our now that we're in the post-industrial age. All right, let's get to this guild stuff, where I'm going to say something nice and controversial for you guys to comment on. So I think of skateboarders as kind of pirates. Okay, so I know this. I'm just going to jump in on and say this. So you know how the pirates have the open seas, and out in that landscape where they're not surveyed, they and of course they're kind of like outlaws. They're rebels of society. They kind of take on this different political imagination. They start thinking about how to organize themselves in a different way. David Graeber just came out with a book locking this in, defending a kind of a loose anarchy amongst pirate populations as being the basis for the Enlightenment. Of course, they were functioning prior to Locke completing his 2 treatises. And so, maybe there was some influence there, according to Graeber. But I think once we look at skateboarding with this kind of pirate lens, as it were, we can kind of reimagine maybe what skateboarders are about, and maybe take closer examination at the different political that they possess. They seem to solve social problems differently. Right? Not only that, but they seem to have less masculine properties and more feminine ones if we look at it from this kind of pirate perspective. So that's kind of what I want to dive into. So there's this kind of cool paradox in skateboarding, that it's both countercultural, but it's also mainstream, right? And so kind of you have this nice flux where skateboarders are really rebellious, and then mainstream culture is like, ooh, I really like these rebellious kids. So you get, the skateboarders kind of acquire some social capital, maybe some material and fiscal capital from this look from the mainstream culture. And the skateboarders try to be a little bit more mainstream. That's maybe one way of like talking through this rebel paradox. And it's actually, if you look at like the papers in this area, there's a lot of them. A lot of them are trying to resolve this rebel paradox, where skateboarders are both politically mainstream and then also, politically, fringe, right? This is also matched with being culturally mainstream and culturally fringe. And so I've kind of like put together this weird little matrix of possibilities of how to organize what's going on here. So we have this really fun work by Yo Chim and Beal, where skateboarders are very mainstream in terms of their masculinity, but as they kind of leave that masculinity, become more countercultural. That's just a quick summary. There's a lot going on in those critiques. This recent paper by Dickinson, I think I misspoke, and I thought I was talking about a different paper, but the Dickinson paper is this aesthetics of the street, where he sees skateboarders as these kind of like new kind of like active Banksies. You have most recently like O'Connor's work trying to talk about skateboarders as prefigurative politics, as kind of like Robin Hoods going around pillaging spaces for everyone to use. And I think all of these work, right? I mean, skateboarding is really diverse and complicated. All of these are good ways to kind of assess this tension between being mainstream and being fringe. But I think that there's something powerful about talking about this in terms of piracy. Sorry, I just wanted to skip ahead real quick, because it helps allay a lot of the masculinity in skateboarding and account for the fact that when you look at skateboarders, right, they don't actually appear that masculine. They're just like kind of weirdos. Maybe that's just who I hang out with, but I mean, you just look at the standard body type of a skateboarder. They're they're not yoked, as it were. They're quite scrawny kids just trying to like navigate the world a little bit. Anything that's jock-like, skateboarders largely dismiss. Skateboarders get injured frequently and then kind of like basically promote the fact they got injured, right? We have a lot of skate videos showing skateboard injuries and kind of praising this component. And I just think that there's a lot more complexity when it comes to thinking about skateboarders and masculinity that don't line up evenly. The way that skateboarders care for spots, as Duncan's paper recently showed, that's a kind of a feminine ethics of care, right? And in fact, when skateboarders get hurt, oftentimes there's a lot of relational care going on. Crews are kind of adjudicated by care rather than by, like, toughen up, kid. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard that except for from some rad dad, telling their kid, toughen up or something. I don't know. That's just a rare component to skateboarding. Usually it's like, man, are you okay? Right? That's relational care. So with the piracy lens, I think we get kind of a more apolitical concept of what skateboarding is. And what skateboarders really care about isn't so much like displaying masculine kind of efforts, though there's a lot of risk involved, no doubt. They don't care about political rights and lefts, as I write here. They're just maneuvering through both, right? Like more obstacles, right? Instead of material obstacles, these are the social obstacles that you navigate through as a skateboarder. Hang out with some people who, a lot of skateboarders who like guns, right? And then I hang out with a lot of skateboarders who don't like guns. And it's kind of fun to like make fun of them on both sides, right? So, that you just kind of, and again, I'm speaking in America, right? This is a very different context than the global context where guns aren't as prevalent. So just kind of in the end here, it seems like, skateboarders, they're like this roving band going around pilfering spots. Their booty is getting a trick at a spot, right, with their friends, and then on they go. They're disturbing the public with their grinding, rattling noises, and they love it, right? Even though the sounds might annoy them, it's kind of like their auditory flag, right? So, I've been quite general with this concept, but as a nice overlay to rethink skateboarding, it helps. All right. So just in conclusion, real quick, I don't have much time to go into this concept of machinic assemblage, and honestly, I don't understand what Deleuze and Guattari are about. But the general concept here is that a machinic assemblage has these kind of two layers. You've got the social fabric, you've got the kind of material object, and they come together in a way that is seemingly random, but when they do come together, it forms kind of a powerful pivot point for humanity. So you get the example of the plow, this piece of metal pulled by an ox or a cow. What was required to make such a device and implement it? Well, there had to be a social fabric of farming, of agriculture, and this kind of material object, right? Same with the stirrup. The stirrup probably was invented before it was used in battle, but once you have a stirrup, you can thrust a spear quite easily, and it completely changed kind of the outlook of how war was done. So too, it seems like we have a machinic assemblage in the skateboard, right? This device that promotes a sideways movement. It doesn't promote competition, but this kind of weird cooperative collective, as it were, of individuals pillaging spaces for spots. Not only that, these spaces are often polluted. And so the people engaged in this sideways kind of attack on the urban city are really familiar with how to deal with pollution and make good on pollution. So the skateboard, let me just end with this nice sentence. The skateboard is a machinic assemblage of our Anthropocene age, enmeshed in its material and social structures and participant enskilment in polluted spaces. It's a liberation technology, right? It counters the pervasive atmosphere of dullness and passivity. You make everything, right, that you skate on. You even make your own skateboard. The decentralizing of skateboard industry, where skateboarders are the ones that are making the products in the industry largely. This all meshes with this idea that, man, maybe skateboards are machinic assemblage. If so, it fulfills this Guattarian idea of ecosophy, where you're going around basically breaking down categories, blurring them, like the categories of pollution and health. You're blurring them and doing what you will. This opens a wider horizon of possible futures and fates for humanity. There we go. QED.
Thank you so much, Brian, for this wonderful talk. I have a couple of questions for you, and then I'll open it up to everyone who's currently present. I'm more than happy if you are not in a position to speak up to read out your questions, but if you want to kind of unmute yourself, feel free to raise your hand and I'll give you the floor. My questions maybe are twofold, and I'll start with the first one, Brian, if that's okay, which is about polluted spaces. You mentioned that you might be sick of it, but I'll ask you about it anyway, because I think there's something really fascinating going on in your discussion of how we as skaters have this enskilment for or attunement to polluted spaces. So what I'm curious about is, what do we as skaters actually learn and teach about these gray spaces? What does this relationality look like to you in terms of almost like pedagogy and enskilment?
Oh man, well, I think you wrote the paper on this. So,
No.
I mean, take for instance the skater's gaze. Where did we learn that? Where did we learn to see spots? I don't think anybody taught me this. And also, why are the spots that I see often polluted spaces, right? They're unused, negative spaces that nobody wants. And I'm just like, wow, that back alley where this bum just urinated, that's a perfect place for me to do this trick. I find that this kind of enskilment with the sailor getting their sea legs is an appropriate metaphor and can help us see the invisible, right? Namely that skaters learn in a very different way than pretty much any other leisure act.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think there's something really fascinating going on, building upon Ian's work with the skater's eye, which is this kind of visual way of looking at the city. But then now it's not only the skater's gaze or the skater's embodied experience of the city, but you turn it into this sideways activity, which I think is really radical and new in skate scholarship, and I haven't really seen it. And that's actually kind of getting me to my second question, which is about this sideways stance, this weird access point that you mentioned that we have as skaters have. And you link it to these hunting practices. And as an anthropologist, I was like, okay, let's go. Really curious about this. And I'd like to actually maybe return these initial questions that you have put to us back to you about coulds and woulds and shoulds. Because I think as humanity generally, hopefully, we've more or less moved beyond these sideways hunting practices for survival or for hunting spaces or hunting animals or whatever you want to call it. could you think we as skaters produce or imagine a sideways activity that doesn't mimic something that is close to hunting? Is there something out there for us without the hunting analogy or metaphor? And what would that look like, you think?
No, thank you. I don't like that metaphor. I mean, like, I'm a vegetarian, my gosh. So yeah, I know, I completely agree with you. My only thought was, I mean, spot hunting is like super common in skateboarding. And then when you see a spot, you don't care what barriers there are to skate it, you just skate it. It's like you're possessed, as it were. And my thought was, well, maybe something quite primordial is going on inside of you that is related to hunting. That this urge that you can't quite control. I mean, I don't know if you've ever hung out with people who fish and hunt, but I'm in the Northwest of America right now, and that's all anybody does here. And they're just, I mean, it's so strange to think of it as a sport, as an activity that organizes their entire life, but it's a very powerful one. Yes, Talia. I was wondering about the foraging component and hoping someone would say something. Foraging about for berries and mushrooms. Maybe, gosh, are you sideways when you do that? See, that was the only question I had. You know, there's something about, you know, the spear, you know, being sideways, the thrust and power, the accuracy. When you're foraging, is there a sideways orientation to the berry? So that was the open question I had, and it seemed so much more obvious with the hunting. So that's the direction I went.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. I have one more question, and I'd like open it up to all of us in this room. And I very much appreciate your suggestion of kind of maybe what would happen if we use piracy and piracy practices and the histories of piracy to deepen our understanding of skateboarding. And particularly when you were talking about relational care and these feminist or feminine ethics of care. And I was just wondering, with piracy, lots of the piracy that we talked about it earlier in the golden age of piracy, right? This kind of disappeared in a way because of all of these international rules and regulations. And if you push this metaphor of seeing skateboarding as a piracy practice in some sense, would you then say that the advent of skate parks in relation to the Olympics and training grounds and skate lessons and kind of these frameworks of safety, of training, of kind of defining what skateboarding is opening up the possibility for the end of the golden age of skateboarding then? Or
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are about
I
this.
no, I left that out. But it does stick in my mind as such a great metaphor to draw with the piracy. You know, yeah, once you start getting coaching and training, nutrition as being the focus of, you know, getting ready for a skate competition, you're starting to enter a kind of arena that is quite organized, right? So take stickball. That was like skateboarding, right? You would find a backyard, a group of friends would come together and they would just throw the ball and hit it. And now that is baseball. Probably the most boring sport ever created. If you ever I just was at a baseball game, and the only way to make that sport exciting is to have constant visual display of games that the audience can play, because the sport itself is boring. No disrespect, but my Mariners, the local team here in Seattle, got totally destroyed, and maybe I'm a little bitter, I'll be honest with you. Maybe I don't like baseball right now, but anyway, I do think that there is this worry that skateboarding will go the way of baseball. And the claim that I'm making is that, I think it should stay like stickball, right?
Thank you. Are there any questions in the room? Esther?
Hello. Hello, Brian. It's nice to actually meet you in kind of visual form. And I'm sorry it's the middle of the night for you. Thank you for being up and taking us through all of that. Lots of really interesting things. I think I'm really taken by the fact that my symbolic field of reference is so different to yours. And it really interests me. And it's fascinating to hear you talk about things like piracy and hunting. When I'm thinking about what skateboarder means to me, probably denotes a very different group of people who are differently gendered in that way. And so that field of reference becomes kind of interesting, because I'm thinking about your hunting analogy, and I'm kind of thinking about when I step outside and head off to my local skate space, and there's a hill bomb on the way. And as I'm hill bombing, I'm not thinking that I'm going hunting. I'm thinking that I'm going to join my community. I'm thinking about the relational aspects. And so that really interests me then, that there can be these two. And of course, there are myriad different ways of us understanding what skateboarder and skateboarding means. So it's nice. It's always nice when someone speaks up and then you get to go, oh, but I think this is the way around. And I think the sideways thing as well. For me, I'm always really conscious of the sliding part, the fun of the slide. And I think about those images of baby elephants sliding down a muddy bank, and that kind of sense of, oh, there are animals that do this for fun as well. It's traveling sideways isn't sensible. It's not functional. It's not the right way to do it if you've got some kind of job to do, but it is the right way to do it if you want to experience pleasure. And so I guess I'm just drawing a different symbolic field. So in a sense, it's not a question. It's just offering up this sort of alternative.
No.
In that way.
Why? I guess. I mean, I wonder if we are on the same page in the sense that the guild, in this paper, is the tight-knit communities that skateboarding fosters, right? And usually they're smaller groups. You have your crew, and even if you're, let's say, even if you're at a skate park, which is a very accessible and safe place for beginner skateboarders, isn't it the case that you're looking at the skate park to do it differently? Do it differently than others?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, even though I theoretically, I'm very frustrated with skate parks and how the grip they have on kind of skateboarding today. When you go there, you see all the skateboarders trying to manipulate the space so that they're skateboarding differently than others or in new ways. And beginners do this, certainly. So I still wonder if there is a kind of hunting, but you're hunting in a reserve, so to speak, and you're getting the easy prey. It's easier, but you're still getting it in a different way than other people. If you're a beginner, you're looking at this in a different way. So I guess my big question is, do you think that you have the skater's gaze where, you're still looking for a way to organize your body around a space differently than other people?
Yeah.
So
I guess to do anything aesthetic, you have to hunt for it, seek it. Right. This is, interesting. Keep considering it.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Esther, and nice to see you. Paul, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi. That was so much fun, such joy listening to that. Really liked Esther's comments as well. There's so much I could comment on, Brian, but I'm just going to stick to sideways and I'm going to go for it. One of the things that really appeals to me, the first thing I did is grab my book of symbols, right? Because I feel like the sideways issue is about symbolism. What does it really mean to be sideways? And I kind of think that sideways might be a tactic. So if you look at the meaning of it, oblique, evasive, indirect, covert, furtive, these are all sort of synonyms to the sort of meaning of being sideways. Then I thought of your pirates, raiding another ship and swinging from the rigging, kind of swinging sideways. And then I thought chess, and I thought if you're thinking about sideways on a chessboard, like a bishop is diagonal, right? But a knight jumps like a skateboarder and moves to the side. And I started to think the really fun thing about your idea of sideways is to look at how it fits with sort of homologous stuff, how you kind of look at, moving sideways, what is sideways like? I love it. And I think it's going to keep me up and distracted for a few hours as well. So great. Just really
Love
cool. That's all I got to add.
Well, yeah, I think Joel Lardner just commented about, the symbolicness of piracy, right? And yeah, I tried to suggest that skateboarders have this kind of auditory piracy. We announce ourselves with sound quite frequently to the world, and we're like, and so that's the kind of symbolic move that I was going to make, Paul, and I'm surprised you didn't comment on the auditory idea, but whatever. Whatever. Sorry. I guess you're in your ritualistic religious mode. That's fine. But again, I think Joel's picking up on this, like, yeah, piracy and skateboarding, there's so many strong connections. I mean, I was just in Tijuana, and there was a researcher there working on skateboarding, and he's like, yeah, you know what skateboarders call each other here? Parada. And I basically started crying. But so anyway, the symbolic components of sidewaysness, I've never thought of it in that way. I've only thought about the piracy and the symbolic components with that. So thank you. Yeah, sideways and covert. I never would have thought of that.
Thank you, Paul, and Brian, also for your answer. There are lots of comments in the chat, which are all worth reading. Also for you, Brian, about different kinds of sideways activities, of hunting as a collective practice. Indy also said that the cute birds who also kind of move sideways. So maybe that's another gift to add to your presentation. Ben, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much, Brian. That was great. And thanks to Sander and Indy for hosting, and the Go Shred crew. Yeah, so I wanted to ask, Brian, you mentioned this idea of the potential end of the golden age of skateboarding, right? And I wanted to ask, was there a golden age of piracy? And if there was, how did it come to an end? And is there anything to be learned there?
Yeah. I mean, you're just setting me up, and I appreciate that. So late 1600s, there's way less hurricanes. So there's a climate influx of piracy that happens in the Caribbean, and it happens around Madagascar. Why? Because shipping is now totally safe. You're not going to lose your load in a storm. most likely. So everyone's shipping their gold. You have this age of kind of horrible colonialism, slavery, and the pirates are just there to take advantage of this pause in hurricanes. Skateboarding is climate grounded. I don't think if we didn't have a drought in California in 66 and 67, it's not clear that skateboarding would become a transition-based activity. That was a real discovery. And in addition, you have the use of the roller skating urethane wheel that was developed in 1960 being appropriated for skateboarding 5 years later. So this is kind of part of the machinic assemblage of skateboarding. These social and material things are just coming together, creating a pivot point for society. So yeah, skateboarding, I think the golden age starts in 1967 or 66 with the first pool coping grind, I'm going to say, probably by Stacy Peralta or maybe Alva. And when will it end? Perhaps the same way that piracy ended. Piracy ends because climate changes. There starts to be more hurricanes. The shipping stops. The shipping of slaves and gold and all that stuff starts to cease, so there's less booty to track, and more surveillance on the seas occurs. And worse, countries are searching and destroying all piracy, right? In Rhode Island, I think you get 80 pirates hung in around 1710. So what do we see in skateboarding today? Well, we've got more surveillance. We've got more passive surveillance with skate stoppers. You've got this kind of carrot being dangled of skate parks and competition. So where, skateboarders are not in the streets. Although, again, skate parks afford like really safe places for people, which I wonder if that's what Henry's going to talk about. But needless to say, I think I'm going to say this, we've got 20 years of the golden age of skateboarding left, and then it's going to become commodified and over-surveyed, over-criminalized, and will probably go the way of baseball or something like this. I mean, if you tried to sit and watch a skate competition like Skate League, it's so boring. I'm sorry. By the way, golf is different from skateboarding because golf doesn't have a stance. It's handed. Okay, so anyway, there we go. Just making that clear.
All right, Harry, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Brian, I love the talk, and I feel like my question / point has changed about 20 times since the questions began. I'm following, I think, a bit from Esther's prompt, but I'm interested. I identify actually quite closely this notion of the hunter or hunting through skateboarding, but I think it also requires us to view hunting in relation to dominance. And I think, whether that's human or animal, often the hunter and the hunter who goes further afield are the less dominant, so socially and culturally, and as a skinny skateboarder type myself, right? Like, I think this is something I can also maybe identify with, where and the notion of being sideways, interestingly, by becoming sideways to what you're hunting, you become smaller, you become less visible, you become less dominant. Whereas most other behaviors in a sort of dominance hierarchy are about inflating yourself. Like you make cats raise their backs to become bigger. Whereas the human who is less powerful, let's say, goes further, hunts further, and so I think there's something actually that's to do with individuals who feel less dominant being attracted to the notion of hunting, as opposed to those who have their power and presence to have it brought forth. So there's loads there, and I think I wanted to also add a little bit in relation to the notion of the pirate, which I think is great. And obviously there's so much piracy in terms of intellectual property that skateboarders flagrantly just take as they will, which I think is interesting. Again, maybe because people have less of a sense of their own ownership or territory. But I think very much about the map, you know, like the treasure map. Like I'm always pestering people for, can you send me this pin, or like, where is this spot? And I'll travel miles and miles. And, you know, and I through the summer, I was purposefully going to the coast to look for skate spots. And what I found interesting was that the sea was the biggest barrier. Like literally, I was skating like into the sand. Like I would just release this video skating like spots where you ride out into the sand. And it's like, that's the furthest you can go. And so for me, it's just funny to think about piracy in relation to the vastness of the ocean, but to a skateboarder, the ocean is the limit of our reach. But anyway, there's no question at this point, but I just want to say thank you.
No surprise. I mean, that you would just take and run. Thank you so much. You know, I do follow this kind of DIY skate crew, and they've had a recent contest to like involve a rock in a DIY feature. And someone made like a strip of concrete out to the ocean where a big rock was, and they made it so that rock is skatable right at the, you know, at low tide. So that kind of relates to this idea of dominance. How funny it is that skateboarders are really curious about dominating spaces that nobody wants anyway. You know, it's like they're pitching their flag and everyone's like, who cares, man? You can have that. That place is terrible. And we're like, yeah. I mean, it's not like the Burnside Bridges. Like nobody wants that disgusting place. So I did want to like kind of end my response to you on what somebody said in the comments about hunting being a group effort. In some of my writing, I have a discussion of game theory. There's this thing called the stag hunt, where it makes rational sense when you're going for big game to be in a larger group. And this probably promoted, you know, the high sociality that we have amongst humans. But then Rousseau, he goes in and he's like, yeah, but the moment a rabbit runs by, most individuals in the group will just leave the group and go for the easy kill of the rabbit. To suggest that, like, even though you have this group dynamic controlled by the big hunt that will feed a lot of people for a lot of time, yeah, that's the one, Paul. That it's easy to leave and become an individual. So needless to say, I think there's a group dynamic in hunting for a spot, but it's also easy to have this carrot of a rabbit, of an easy score just sitting there. Let's see. Wow. Okay. I can't believe that the sea is getting a discussion with respect to skate spots. Maybe this is the new territory. So thank you very much.
Right. I think that's all the time we have today. Brian, I would like to thank you so much for this fabulous piece. I think it elicited a lot of new thoughts in many of us. Like Harry was saying, my thoughts changed 20 times over the course of over an hour, which is I think the biggest compliment I think you can get as a scholar. I would like to thank everyone for contributing to the discussion, and Ben and Indy and the SHRED team will probably post the video in a few weeks' time on the SHRED website. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for the comments.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, Sander. Yeah, we'll post this. Ben is the genius that manages to put this onto YouTube for us. And we'll be having some more talks I think there's one more for this year, and maybe, excuse me, I'm a bit sick. Cliff is one of our speakers coming up in the new year, and Sander, and what we're trying to do is also get different hosts as well to have these really enriching conversations. And also there's definitely a sort of a trend in gender of the speakers that we've had as well. So we're definitely very keen to have more women and non-binary and gender diverse speakers as well. So we're really open to recommendations as well for people that you would like to suggest. And meanwhile, we do have some really great speakers coming up, as well as Sander and Cliff. I think Roberto Enriquez is going to give a talk as well about the Mexican DIY scene. And we've reached out to Dr. Jessica Murphy as well, who does sport ecology, looking at the ways that companies, definitely have a big impact on the environment and how we consume. So yeah, really appreciate people giving their time to do these talks. And thank you so much, Sander, for doing such a great job hosting, and Brian, your talk. I'm never going to get over that bone turning into a skateboard. Thank you. And thank you, Toby, and everybody else for your questions as well. We didn't get time. Brian, are you good to answer some questions one-on-one with people that didn't get time later?
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, so people can reach out to you if they have questions. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop recording and